How do nutrients move through an ecosystem? When a nutrient moves through an ecosystem, I mean things like water or carbon or nitrogen. These are nutrients that move and cycle through an ecosystem. For example, how does water get recycled? Well, you might see this big lake or pond or stream or river, and you might wonder, how is it that that water that sometimes gets pumped out, how does it get replaced? Well, water evaporates. That is, as the temperature rises, the water turns from liquid to gas and it moves into the atmosphere. Well, once it reaches a relatively colder temperature, it begins to condense in clouds, and then it might start to rain. That's called precipitation. So evaporation as it goes from liquid to gas, and then precipitation as it went from gas then to liquid and then falls back to the earth. The process of going back to a liquid is called condensation. You might say, oh, I see condensation on my window. That's where it's going from gas or vapor to a liquid. So that could be snow or rain. Sublimation is when snow or something like cold, like ice, goes from that solid state of water to a vapor state of water. That uh, rain runs down the mountainside, runs off rooftops, and runs into a stream that might fill a lake or pond or river. It might soak into the ground. That's called infiltration. It might be stored as groundwater. Transpiration is taking that water from the ground through roots and then out through uh, out through leaves. And so that water is going to cycle from the atmosphere back to Earth, along the Earth, under the Earth, and then out maybe through plants or evaporation or moving along the surface of the Earth. And we call that the water cycle. Other nutrients also have a cycle, like the carbon cycle, where carbon in the atmosphere has to be captured by plants through the process of photosynthesis. And then that carbon becomes a sugar molecule, which is eaten by things like the rabbit. Then the rabbit dies and releases that carbon into the soil through things like decomposition. And it might become something like a lump of coal, which then we burn and release back into the atmosphere, or a volcano erupts and releases carbon into the atmosphere, or we light a little fire for our campfire, and that releases the carbon that was stored in the plant back into the atmosphere. And then from the atmosphere, it's going to be captured uh, by plants through photosynthesis and then recycled through the ecosystem. Nitrogen works in a very similar way. Nitrogen you'll have in the atmosphere, and that nitrogen has to somehow get back or be able to be reused by living things. So it might be captured by plants through the roots. It might be those plants might be eaten then, and then we use those that nitrogen for things like amino acids and proteins. But when animals die or there's decay or you have a compost pile, that nitrogen gets released into the soil, which might get taken up by roots or might be released into the atmosphere and it's captured by rain. And so the nitrogen then is moving through this ecosystem. Now you'll notice that it's in several forms, like ammonia. You'll see that under the soil there. We find ammonia in things like urine or like nitrates. All right, so nitrates are a form of nitrogen that you might find in the soil. Farmers often have to worry about nitrate levels in their soil because it's an indication of how healthy the soil is. But too much nitrate, let's say in a stream, could have adverse effects to the life in the stream. So it's important that this nitrogen gets cycled through the ecosystem, but also in the right amounts and that it gets reused in ways that are beneficial to the ecosystem. So water and carbon dioxide or carbon and nitrogen are all types of nutrients that are cycled through an ecosystem. and they're indications of how healthy that ecosystem is.